Good evening, everyone. Thank you all for joining us this evening. I guess it's a sign of this being a regular event in my life that I haven't prepared notes. I probably should have, but basically I just wanted to begin by thanking you all for joining me here. This event with a lecture and writing awards began as a way to remember our son, a wonderful young man who loved every minute he was at Brown and really blossomed here, and we thought Brown would be the place where we could remember him the best and where he really was the man he almost became. And the process over the last 13 years, of course, has been difficult, learning to live with the loss and to get through grief. But what I've learned is that the ritual is important in and of itself, that marking these memories and bringing people together for them in a way that's positive and creates circles of friends is life-affirming, and that's what one wants to be when one thinks about how to cope with loss and how to remember. So, as is the case at each one of these events, there are these wonderful overlaps and circles that continue to grow as a result of Casey's life. Last year, Malcolm Burnley won for an essay that reminded me a great deal of the essay that Jasmine Yanada, my granddaughter, was handing out today about the history of Brown and what it means in terms of society's change. This year, it turns out one of Malcolm's best friends has written a poignant essay that won this year about the death of her young brother and what it meant to her family. So once again, we have these kind of circles of what life's meaning is and how they connect. And as I mentioned, this is the first year that my granddaughter is attending one of these events, so it marks another generation coming to remember an uncle she didn't know, but she is aware of and keeps in her mind and keeps in her lore about the family, and will continue to now that we have this event. And it's a way also to recognize Beth Taylor. Beth was Casey's mentor when she encouraged him to write in his first writing classes. And after Casey died, she encouraged us to come up with this program that would help her establish a nonfiction writing program that would gain prestige and notice on campus, and it's grown wonderfully since then. And I subsequently learned that Beth had lost a brother and learned from the tragedy of loss as well, and it was no surprise that she was as empathetic to me and my family as she was. So I'm here to just welcome those of you who made the special effort to come and join us and to recognize the wonderful young people who are going to be honored, and to listen to a rising young star, somebody who was part of Casey's class in college and, at least in one of his films, channeled all of Casey's interests, and to support him as he moves forward, because that's what this event is. It's circles of friends and friendships and networks building life-affirming happiness as we go forward. And we have to thank Beth for getting us started on this adventure, and she's going to introduce the writers who've won. So thank you very much for being here.
Thank you, Ruth, and thank you all for being here. This is the 13th year of honoring Casey, who was one of the best writers in one of our first nonfiction writing classes. And again, a heartfelt hello to all of his friends and family that show up every year very loyally. One of these circles of embrace since his death. His legacy does continue to be reflected in our program through all the students that come to study journalism, academic essay, and all the different iterations of creative nonfiction that we now teach in 50 courses in the nonfiction writing program in the Department of English. We particularly want to thank Ruth Goldway and Derek Shearer for funding this award, which does highlight the best writing that comes out of our program each year. By the way, by July 1st, these winners' pieces will be posted on Prospect, which is our webzine that showcases our award-winning pieces from the year, including the Shearer Awards. And now I'd like to honor the winners of the 2013 Casey Shearer Memorial Awards for Excellence in Creative Nonfiction. The second place Casey Shearer Memorial Award for Excellence is for her moving and eloquent memoir, My Brother, in which she intertwines the story of a family tragedy with an eloquent exploration of grief, memory, and the complicated articulation of feeling. We honor Erica Schweigenshausen, class of 2013. Erica? And the first place Casey Shearer Memorial Award for Excellence in Creative Nonfiction for her painterly and atmospheric lyric essay, The Year of the Dragon, in which she tests the limits of myth as a guide to what really happened. We honor Elizabeth Powers, class of 2014. Elizabeth? And now I would like to introduce Casey Shearer's beloved brother, Anthony, who will introduce our honored guest.
Well, hello, everyone. I'm Anthony. I'm Casey's older brother. We have the same mother, different fathers. That's why there's a difference in the last name. And this is Jasmine. It's her first time here getting to know about Casey. In any case, this year coming back is a little bit more emotional than prior years. It may be that due to the fact that I've turned 40, I'm getting into my patterns in life, and I realize that my brother's not there to have those conversations with about sports, about life. It's pretty hard, but it's also because I start to think of what could have been and taking pride in his accomplishments while he was around and seeing one of his peers, one of his guys, one of the crew that really achieved something in the field of storytelling. And that's what we've come to celebrate here every year, is the power of storytelling. And what Beth does is she opens up the world about the commitment it takes to go and study and commit yourself to a project, to spend time verifying your sources, to spend time thinking about it, to go through serious revisions and challenging yourself to put the time in to get the story right. And in having Jeff here today, you see sort of what can be done if somebody with good training and good stock, and if they're able to commit themselves to it every day of their life, they get better and better. And it's a message that comes out that contains not only entertainment, but real social commentary and real statements about what's going on in today's world through sports, which is something that all of us sort of connect around. And so, with that in mind, I'm happy, I'm delighted Jeff's here, but I also feel some sadness about what could have been for Casey. He was a great kid. It's storytelling within his blood. I don't know if many people know this, but his grandfather used to write for Parade magazine. Back before the internet, I guess, the Sunday newspapers every week would come with only one color insert, and it was Parade magazine. And there was a column in there called Ask Walter Scott, and Walter Scott was a pseudonym that his grandfather used to write an article, and at one point in time was the most widely read columnist in America. So in Casey's blood and in his genes and his DNA was this idea of journalism and storytelling, because not only did his grandfather do that column, but he also wrote about 40 to 50% of the other content. So he was really skilled and was around people that asked inquisitive questions, that could understand the story and understand all the angles. And on top of that, there was a love for sports. So when we were growing up, it was the Lakers with Magic Johnson, and Magic Johnson was, I guess, it was just a galvanizing force that brought everybody together and created love and passion and excitement about it. And the man who told the stories was a guy named Chick Hearn. And Chick Hearn is the most legendary basketball broadcaster around. And he came up with the terms like the slam dunk and the alley-oop and I forget the one about the popcorn. But in any case, Casey used to go to his room after the Laker games, and he'd have a Nerf hoop on each end, and he'd announce games in his head. He'd be in this entirely other world. So he had this journalistic sort of capacity in his blood. He had this love for sports and a willingness to do it, and it translated into a pretty interesting, I'll say, career as a young adult. So while here at Brown, he became the voice of Brown sports, for what was basically a downtrodden, defunct sports radio department. He started doing everything from the softball games to the basketball games and the football games, and he also wrote a weekly column for the Brown Independent that all of his friends would go read. And some of his friends, sometimes they'd watch the NBA on the weekends, and I think Gabe can attest to this, and his friends Dave and Alex and maybe Jeff, but they'd turn off the sound and let Casey go ahead and announce the games, which I was surprised to learn. Dave Kaluri told me that about 6 or 7 months ago. So it was in his blood. He was doing it. He was committed to it every day. And on top of that, he was a very serious student. So even though it was sports that was his love, when it came time to get to the real nuts and bolts of academia, he was there. And through Beth, he was able to see the rigorous nature of academia that he'd been so well trained for and apply it towards sports. So Jasmine here has been circulating an article which was written back for the Brown Alumni magazine and published shortly before his death, where he went into the archives like you guys have and uncovered the story of the team at Brown that went to the Rose Bowl and how they beat Yale in a very, very special game. And it sort of tells the story of some Brown athletic accomplishment at the time. So in any case, I'm sort of forgetting where I was going now. To Jeff, yes. So with Jeff here and his message, I watched the two Escobars again the other night, and it's absolutely fascinating to me because it combines some real social commentary, real sports, and it shows the power of storytelling. So with that in mind, I've lost my way a little bit here, and with Jasmine at my side, we'd like to welcome Jeff today to kick us off here on his presentation.
This is Leslie Thornton, who is my professor in MCM when I was an undergrad here, and she's going to be discussing stuff with me and asking questions. I'm really honored to be a part of this, and I just every year around this time when this event happens, there's this outpouring of just of community and support and unity, and everyone Facebooks each other, and we all reflect on who Casey was to us and his life and the impact he had, and I really value that, and I'm just honored to be invited to be a part of it. He was a special guy, and we were all real close with him, so thanks for that. The way that I would like to do this is just to make it conversational. I'm accustomed to the Q&A format, where we show the film and then we answer questions. So please, at any point, if you have questions, or even right off the bat, if there's something that you would like to throw out there, just let us know, and keep it real informal and fun, hopefully. But I guess Leslie can start us off in the meantime.
Get my microphone back in place. Well, I wanted to say, well, thank you very much for inviting me to participate in this event. And it's a joy for me to see Jeff again, who I have a very vivid memory of. I mean, I've been teaching a long time, and in the long run, after decades, you don't remember that many people. You remember very special people. And so Jeff is one of those people. And I was just telling him before we got things going that what I really remembered was when he left school, he went to India that summer, and then I get this email from him that he's, I mean, you were 22, right? Now I know you ran into some guys on a hike in India who were working for the UN, and you had a camera, and they were interviewing people for a documentary, and you already were making a film. By the end of, I mean, you just got there, and you've been off and running.
I'd completely forgotten this story until
Yeah,
Leslie
he
reminded
forgot.
me. It was a little
like-
gig, but I was at the time, I was...
You were very excited.
Never in my wildest dreams. I was working for the UN. It turned out to be not as romantic as I thought it was going to be.
Yeah.
And that trip ended terribly, but actually I had just finished my thesis here at Brown, and I was going to visit my brother in India, and he was at a monastery. He actually got a parasite, and he left. I showed up out there with no plans. And so the first thing you do is you hike the Annapurna circuit, and I ran into these guys wearing hiking boots, and it was my first official pitch. I said, I can do this video for you, and I studied third world development, and I know I've got my camera with me. So that ended up working out, yeah.
Yeah, so I thought, I think we have a lot of different kinds of people in the audience.
I'm curious, actually,
Yeah.
just of who's interested in, let's just say, sports journalism. And how many people are writers or consider themselves interested in writing? And any filmmakers or aspiring filmmakers? So anybody who's not in some way a media creator of some sort or would associate with that? Well, you're an exception because you're a friend. Okay, well, yeah, we can talk about all of those things, but that's a good range of, you know, I think a lot of what we all face coming out of school and going into a career is very similar. You know, whether you're creating a film or you're creating an article or you're creating a book, I think there's a lot of overlap. Yeah.
Well, one question I'd like to start off with is that most of your work has been in documentary as a form, and journalistic, but not always going for the kind of authentic truth. We were talking a little
Right.
about the subjective side as well.
We've taken a lot of liberties, and I think there's been benefits of of making things more stylized and going for bigger emotion, and there's also been some blowback. The first feature that I directed was called FAVELA Rising, which was in Brazil, and at the time I was so passionate about what we were focusing on, which is this community of like-minded artists in the slums or the favelas of Rio. They're in a war zone, and there's no professional opportunities in this place. And these guys, of their own accord, without sort of traditionally waiting for an answer or for aid from the outside, decided that they were going to transform their community from the inside out. And they started creating alternatives to the drug trafficking trade for youth. And they picked up, you know, trash cans and found objects and taught kids how to drum and created baterias and musical groups. And before long, they were generating income, and they were generating a new sense of values and empowerment in this community, that people, that we can do it for ourselves and that we don't have to die by the age of 25, right? And it's this model they called asset-based community development. And this was my thing. Like at Brown, that was what I was all about. In my thesis film, actually, which we can talk about too, I was critiquing these models of aid where the first world countries are just handing out charity and we're superior and paternalistic, we have the answers. And so this was great. This was the people doing it themselves. And I was so enamored with them and with their model that looking back at that film, even though I'm proud of it, it was propaganda. I mean, this was just a huge fluff piece for these guys, but it was done in a way in which, you know, it didn't, I don't think it felt like a promotional video. It didn't create these three-dimensional characters with flaws like I knew that they were. I actually omitted a lot of information from that experience that, you know, that if the me of today and sort of I'm a little bit more strictly journalistic and accurate and try and be balanced in my reporting, but at the time it was how can we get this message to the world, right? And coming from MCM, I think there was already this very postmodern kind of subjective understanding of what's truth anyway, right? And everything's, you know, whatever you leave on the cutting room floor, you're already making choices that are manipulating the message. Just the fact that you can choose to end a story on an upswing or a downswing, right? If you're telling a cinema verite story and it's unfolding in front of you, just that choice about when to end production is massive. You know, I could paint a picture of the favelas if I had continued for one more month from when we finished Favela Rising. There was a war in that favela and things fell apart. The organization that I was focusing on, the rug was pulled out from under them. A lot of their good hard work over a decade was put into question. If you finish the story there, you know, that's a call to action. That's actually sort of reinforcing a lot of the this is a lost cause perception of these types of communities. But we made the choice to end it before that. We were editing while that was going on, and we ended it on an upswing, very consciously saying we want people to leave the theater activated to make change, activated to try to apply this model in their own communities. And I think in some ways I wish that at the time, I was young, this is when I was 24, I wish at the time I was making that choice more consciously. I'm glad that I did make that choice. I think it was a fun way to tell that story, and the impact that that film had justified it all, right? The film did gangbusters at festivals and critically, and the Ford Foundation decided that it should be used less as a sort of form of entertainment and more as a vehicle for activism, for change. And so the Ford Foundation got on board with a big sum of money and financed an outreach campaign. And we went around the world to communities that were also facing these adversities, right? There was neglect and poverty and racism and violence. And we brought Afro Hege, some of the guys from this organization in Brazil, to teach some of those skills. And we went to South Africa and Jamaica, and we went to various inner city schools in the United States. And so that was invaluable. And I don't think you have that experience if you tell more of a balanced, nuanced story. Stuff we've done since then has certainly been way more, I think, traditionally journalistic.
So that was through the Ford Foundation?
The film wasn't financed through them. But they did the outreach campaign. Yeah.
Oh, so it was very influential, I think, as an activist work.
Right.
I wanted to ask, since there's so many writers here, now you're doing some more fictional work, developing projects that are more Hollywood-centered, I assume, with bigger budgets and more people looking over your shoulder, but you're also writing these.
Right.
And I have a question about the movement from documentary as a form into a more fictional form.
Right.
And you're writing it, so since you're not taking somebody else's script. Can you talk at all about what you've learned through looking at the world in the document? Has that helped? How does it affect what you do as a writer, a script writer?
Yeah, it's interesting. I'll segue into that by saying that part of what felt limiting with the Favela Rising experience, the experience I just talked about, was that there was all this emotion in those screenings and in those educational events, but it did feel like a group of like-minded people, right? And these were people that, I'm not saying preaching to the choir, but they were people that were already had a certain bias towards or interest in these types of grassroots movements, right? Or revolution or whatever it may be. And my brother, who I work with, comes from a fiction background. He was a trained actor at NYU, and he had run a theater company in Mexico. And so with that partnership, he brought this desire to use media specifically to try and share messages and stories and context with audiences that otherwise might not have an interest in them, right? That became kind of a new goal. The goal evolved from let's find these prescriptive stories of like communities doing very positive things in places that are usually perceived as falling apart, which is kind of my bag. And then together we started saying, well, let's look for these other types of stories that could, create an understanding between an individual in one part of the world and their cultural or class counterpart, and that's what the world needs more of, right? We need to understand each other, be able to step in each other's shoes. And so in writing, we've chosen stories, in fiction writing or scripted writing, and I'm hesitant to use that term because they're all based on real events. We research the heck out of them. In fact, we do just as much, if not more, research on these fiction scripts than we do on our documentaries. We did a film on the two Escobars, which Anthony mentioned, had Pablo Escobar in it, and we were approached by the actor Javier Bardem afterwards to write a sort of character portrait of Pablo Escobar that he could play Pablo Escobar. And we had done a crazy amount of intensive research for the documentary, but when Javier came and said, write a fiction script, we tripled it. And we hired a team, and we went even deeper, and went back to Colombia, and we met with even more people, and did extensive interviews with his family. I mean, that process is really similar, the writing process, for a based on real events fiction script to a documentary. And then the other thing that I think the main sort of focus in that next stage after research with writing these scripts is to separate the unnecessary from the necessary, to find the essence. And that's the hardest part. That's where you've got to have in your short-term memory the entire forest, right? You got to know all the big picture elements, and so you got to cave yourself up and have the entirety of your short-term memory just invested into this one. And once you make those choices, for us in our process, once we make those choices about what's essential and what's simple, what's the core story here, right? Then we have either a log line or a nugget, sometimes we call it, which I'm sure writing teachers have other terms for these, but it's a common technique that you just paste that on your computer monitor, and that's your anchor. And you always come back to that. And that's been helpful in the Hollywood context, like you said, because, all of everything you think would come with celebrities being attached to a film is there. And it's really hard to consistently check back in with what you wanted from a project. You get lost a lot of times in what's best for the film to get off the ground, or so it doesn't fall apart, or even what's best for your career or your brand. And we have agents and managers, and so that becomes a whole thing that you get kind of trapped in that cloud. And one of the things I've appreciated about Brown and MCM, the modern culture and media experience that I had here, and I took some writing classes when I was at Brown. But one of the things I really appreciated was that you were in this cocoon where you were very protected. It was a very safe space, and encouraged to experiment and push boundaries and try things that were very uncomfortable. And there wasn't any, the focus was from you all was, how does media affect society? Focus on that, not how does media affect your career. And so I often, when I feel lost or I'm faced with like a tough ethical or career decision, well, if I was in that vacuum again, what types of stories would I choose to tell? What would be my approach to telling those stories? All influences aside, and it's a real helpful kind of mantra to come back to, what would I do in that vacuum?
Do you have any, I assume you had more freedom when you were working on the documentaries than you are experiencing now, going for a different audience and money, and I'm just wondering how you're feeling about that. It's just really happening now in these last few years.
Yeah, right? We've had many more success stories in nonfiction than we've had in fiction.
Yeah.
But we have been working for a while on, and we've made some money, but we haven't completed a fiction project. And so we've stacked up our the necessary horror stories that we've done those. We got those out of the way. And we've got some good projects. We actually this week found out that we'll be doing a fiction feature on Pelé, the soccer star, which we'll shoot this summer. And we wrote about the early years of his life, the birth of the legend, from when Pele was 10 to when he was 17 years old. And we approached the story a lot less like a classic sports narrative and more like a superhero movie, like a superhero origins movie. So this is Pele trying to embrace his special power, right? In much the same way a superhero would need to learn to control his superpower to save the world, Pele needs to learn how to control the Jenga or the gift in order to save Brazil. So that'll be a fun one. That's this summer. I'm excited about that. And I think part of the reason that it's gotten off the ground is because it's obviously pretty commercial subject matter. And we've written these other things. They're in Spanish language. They're very political. You know, they tend to have more of a documentary bend. So those have been much more challenging to get off the ground.
I'm just really overwhelmed by the background that I see now, looking over your body of work so far, and imagining you battling it out. I mean, with the kind of social and political sensitivity that you have, battling it out in Hollywood, which is a war zone.
It's a war zone.
Yeah, it's not a nice place.
Agreed. Confirmed.
Yeah. Confirmed. Yes, but you're okay.
I'm okay. I mean, you know, I have migraines and I work a 70-hour week, and but no, I'm just really gracious that we have these opportunities and they're good challenges. And one of the things at Brown that I thought I was a purist. I thought I was all about process and product didn't matter as much to me. And so, you know, even if the product didn't happen, as long as I was true to my values and I worked hard and I challenged myself during the process, then I was satisfied. It was a very idealistic way of looking at things, which I realized really quickly after school that it wasn't fulfilling, you know, and that I was much more of a consequentialist, that I was actually willing to do some compromises in that process there in order to get the film finished, in order to get the project made, that the ends in some ways justified the means, and I was all right with that. And there's projects, I mean, even, I go back to Favela Rising, like, you know, that was a process. Even just to make a small documentary like that, there was all sorts of tough ethical decisions along the way. You know, he ended up really caring about the project, and he said that he would invest, he would be incentivized going forward to make the film the best it could be. And it wasn't honest, but I also felt a certain loyalty to him, and we had a team, and the film needed all the help it could get. It was a little tiny film that was, you know, going up against heavy hitters, and I did it. And there's been other times where I haven't done things like that, where I've quit projects because ethically I've been so appalled at what's being asked of me. But there are times like that with Favela Rising where, you know, somehow you wrap your head around it. And I just never would have thought that that's who I was when I was at Brown, to put it that way.
Well, yeah, there's so much in film that's hidden. So, and credits are kind of wacky anyway, right?
Right.
When you see a film and there are, 20 different producers, what did all of those people do? They all have slightly different names. Some of the names are just kind of favors or paying back. Some of the people work really hard, but it's, especially in Hollywood,
and with
so much is hidden. You know, the person, like I have a friend who's a very well-established screenwriter, but he spent, and has done films that you would know, but he spent the first 15 years in Hollywood getting paid more as a script doctor than the people who were listed as the writers, who didn't even do that much or had something pretty crappy, but they got the deal.
That's what I was going to say, and Beth can probably speak to it better, but ghostwriting is a very accepted practice that ethically is so questionable. I mean, you know, who's getting credit for this and why? I mean, it feels like credits are much more about branding, that there's strategic ways of getting more publicity and advertising for a product, which ultimately these things are. And the bigger the budget, the more your film feels like a product. Or the more your book, I imagine, feels like a product, that there's a machine that you get plugged into, who, because there's more on the line and there's more risk, therefore is going to treat it like a precious commodity rather than a piece of art. And those are trade-offs that, you know, even though I know going into some of these bigger budgeted projects that that's the world we're getting into. On that spectrum of art to commerce, you have to know when you're making a big budget film that you're way over here and that there's going to be consequences, that things are going to come with that. But it's still, each time I'm reactive and righteous, and, you know, and it's hard to swallow that pill.
Did you want to tell us any of those fun stories at all? Changing the names? The good ones?
Today, for example,
or the bad ones?
This is a cautionary tale, but today we have a celebrity actor attached to one of our projects, which is about a peace community in Colombia, and they've been nominated, Nobel Peace Prize nominated, and it's one of these like great models that can be replicated, right? Sort of universal model. But we wrote it as a fiction script so that we could reach a bigger, more diverse audience with it, and we attached the biggest celebrity that we've ever had attached to a project, somebody who's very valuable when you try and go out and raise money for it. And we want to shoot it in Colombia, and this person has loads of security, just is a US celebrity, loads of security. And they said, well, the only way we'll do it is in Colombia, where the film takes place, is if we meet with the president of Colombia, and he reassures us personally that he's got our back, and that we're fine, and, you know, the whole military is going to be behind us. And these are celebrities who are used to that. Like, they're friends with the Obamas, and next week they're going to be hanging out with the Clintons. But Colombia didn't quite get that, right? But we did it. We pulled it off when the meeting is on Monday morning, and with the president of Colombia. And we set up a bunch of other, and so they got their private plane, and they've spent who knows how much money, hundreds of thousands of dollars, to arrange this with multiple people going down. And this morning, the president of Colombia canceled.
Oh dear.
And all of a sudden, like, I'm supposed to be writing screenplays and editing images, and I'm trying to put out a fire like that. I'm so out of my league, you know. That's the kind of position that you find yourself in, and you failed, right? There's nothing I can do. I'm not familiar with that world. I mean, maybe it'll work out, but it'll take a miracle.
Call Obama.
Right, because I've got him on my speed dial.
Whoa. So the project is in jeopardy.
Yeah, and it's devastating, because why are those the stakes, right? Why should a project that everybody agrees at the core, it's like essentially everybody agrees with what's the cause that it's about, and sees it as a vehicle to help with that cause. Why would essentially the egos or the politics of a meeting or a press release or a photo stand in the way? But it's also, the explanation is built into that, which is, that's what you've asked for when you ordered that dish.
Right. Yeah. It's invisible forces.
Mm-hmm.
So far. It's just happened today.
Right. So fingers crossed it could work out. But
turned down by the president of Colombia.
Right.
I'm sorry.
So I'm here to tell my sob story, and afterwards I'll be taking free massages. But good things have happened too, and when, you know, sometimes you spend a lot of time, we do a lot of pitching and a lot of preparation for our pitches. You know, when I was at Brown, I was under the impression that if you sought out the really talented kids, that those are the guys that were going to go far, and that's where you want to hitch your wagon, and that was nonsense. And then I was sort of like, well, work ethic, like who's all about it, who's passionate. And that was a little bit more true, but it's really just resilience. It's like, who can keep getting up? And this is Beth was saying too, right?
Yeah.
That message is everywhere. When you're talking about, you know, competing in a rat race, it's like, who's willing to keep getting back up after they get knocked down? And that persistence, those are the people that, if they work their face off, they're going to get somewhere. And it doesn't guarantee you're going to be fulfilled. You know, you have to find that balance and not get rutted into something that you don't enjoy doing. But hey, you made it, right? That's another sort of wrong turn. Well, I forget where I was going with that.
I don't know. You just got this bad phone call today. That's what I remember. Maybe we should open this up to some questions.
Sure. Yeah.
Or comments from the audience.
Have people seen the two Escobars or Favela Rising? Yeah. Let's
yes,
show some
that would be
stuff.
great.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'd forgotten about that. All right, so the one I've been talking about is Favela Rising. I'll show you guys the trailer for that film.
Vila Geral é uma das mais de 600 favelas do Rio de Janeiro, uma favela que foi considerada a Bósnia brasileira. Aqui fui nascido e criado. Enquanto as crianças que moram fora da comunidade eram embaladas, elas dormiam com cantigas de ninar, nós, quando éramos pequenos, dormíamos ao som do tiro, ao som das pessoas gritando, ao som da violência.
Posso sair daqui pra me organizar, posso sair daqui pra me organizar, posso sair daqui pra desorganizar, da lama ao caos, do caos à lama, homem culpado nunca se canta.
E infelizmente nós perdeu o irmão dele.
Pô, por que eles querem se matar? Por que dessa violência, esse ódio? E se pensa, né, como combater essa violência. E fui começando a prestar atenção, usar a música, a cultura como instrumento da mudança. Do afro-reggae contra o África, ela sempre houve, mas de cada um jovem que a gente tirava, tinha 3, 5 esperando. Pra gente era legal, porque a gente pelo menos tinha tirado uns, mas...
I'll show you the other one that we were talking about is the 2 Escobars. I'll show you that too. Let me try with a different app here.
En esa época se convirtió entre un tira y afloja entre los narcotraficantes.
Pablo Escobar would kill anybody to win a soccer game.
Associated Press has reported that Colombia received a death threat at the team's hotel.
Me secuestraron a mi hija. Pensamos que teníamos que ir más sí o sí, que era la última oportunidad. Entonces fuimos a jugar bajo esa torre.
Drug traffickers made large bets on the Colombian team.
Next will be the drug lord and the national team player.
Cuando se presentó el autogol, me cogí el rostro y dije, el país se acabó.
I could also show you, I mentioned the Pele film, we cut like we did a trailer where, a sizzle, where the idea was that we hadn't shot any footage yet, but we were first-time fiction directors. So we had to go into that pitch session being able to show not only can we write and we can pitch and we have our story sort of treatment down, and you may like the structure, but you have to trust us stylistically, right? What's our vision aesthetically for the project? And so we cut a 6-minute sizzle, we called it, for Pele, which is something that, I don't know, sometimes people do it, although I think it's rather rare. And it used footage from all these films that we liked, and we compiled it together to create more or less the look and feel that we expected Pele to be, and I think that's partially why we were able to get attached as a director. I have a 1-minute version of that here. You guys want to watch that quickly, and then we could talk some more? Okay.
Yes. Yeah.
Accidentally playing you the long one right now. Sorry. that's a way glossier version of what that film will be. I mean, that is literally to appeal to like lowest common denominator finance people who don't understand story and just want to know that we can cut something stylish and glitzy. But the film, I reassure you, and obviously I'm insecure about this, is substantial. Yeah.
Well, this is still very impressive, even if it's
Thanks,
gloss. It's the editing is fantastic.
Cool, thanks.
The way now I'm seeing you moving through cultures, across cultures.
Right.
There's some consistency in that. In
Yeah.
the work.
You mean in terms of what the multiple projects,
Yeah.
the parallels between them?
Yeah.
I mean, part of that is because there's a lot of repeat footage.
Okay.
But also, yes, they're Latin America. We're looking for exciting, entertaining, widely accessible windows into the types of societal and cultural issues that we want to explore.
Yeah.
Right? And so, to us, having music as a device in a film is very similar to having sport as a device in a film.
Yeah.
And we map out, when we do our structures, you know, and in the writing process, we map out how long we have between sort of an exciting montage or a game or a concert or something like that. And if it's too close together, often it feels too MTV, too montage-y, and we don't attach to the characters enough. If there's too much of it strung out where it's high adrenaline, high octane, then we don't have the opportunity to connect emotionally in a quieter space, in a more spacious way with our characters. And so there's a lot of that rhythmic balancing going on top of the actual story. You know, where's the plot point? Where are we, you know, setting up an idea that will then come back around and pay off later? That stuff's going on. That's my brother.
Okay.
And I'm doing the pacing and the rhythm and trying to, yeah. There's these big aha moments in edits that I think is really similar to writing, where you kill a baby and it opens the whole thing up. Mm-hmm. And it's like a football player or a soccer player describing when they see a lane, when it just opens up and they see their vision right through to the, you know, a pathway illuminates. With Favela Rising, one that was interesting is that the whole first half of the first 30 minutes of that documentary is the massacre. It was the first trailer I showed, right? It's the massacre, the violence, the dead-end lifestyle of the favela, of these slums. And because Afro-Hege they have hip-hop, they've got funk. So I was using songs, beats, I was using rhythm in Act 1, as we called it, the first 30 minutes, for the longest time. And this is a learning process, this film, for me. And it was still dark, and it was still moody and sad. But when they discovered that music was the answer, which is that big event that launches the protagonist, you know, towards their goal, the end of Act 1, it didn't pay off. Like, we just weren't, the swell of emotion wasn't there. And it took forever to figure out the obvious, which is there shouldn't be any real music in Act 1, right? The band hasn't started yet. The answer is the music, and there wasn't music prior to the band, so don't put any music in. And when we cut all the beats out, and we just let that first act, those first 30 minutes, just kind of stew in the drones and the darkness, you were so claustrophobic that you really wanted to get out. And so when the music arrives, I think you identify much more closely with that experience that they had, and it paid off much bigger. And those are man, I live for that stuff. Those moments are amazing, yeah, when you figure it out.
Is there anything in particular that you like to do the most? Like you've done a lot as an editor, but
I do
your
like
resume, you've got,
I like
you're doing
editing the most.
everything, but you're doing, you produce, you write.
But everyone in here will do everything. That's my theory. Is that
really? Because it doesn't, I don't know.
Maybe not quite to that extent, but I think you have to, for a while at least. You got to keep your eye on what is your favorite role. In my case, directing and editing. Yeah. But then know that you're going to service all these other roles until there's a crew around you, which takes forever before you get those budgets.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it helps to know everything, but I think a lot of people don't know everything anymore.
Right. I love the cave. I love being able to lock myself away and become a hermit. And when I come out, I'm all dodgy-eyed and I can't communicate with people because I'm like so stuck in my edit. But that's very incompatible with life.
Yeah. Right. So, do we have some more comments or questions? Yes.
So,
my father's a Latin Americanist. He's an economist who was into socialism. He was a socialist for a while. And he was in Panama, he was in Cuba working with Castro, and then he was in Chile. And my brother and I heard these stories growing up. You probably know some of this, Ruth, but he had these amazing sort of war stories, so to speak, like these adventure stories. He was tipped off on September 10th, 1973 in Chile when he was working with the Allende government that there was going to be a coup, and he got out of there, and 40 hours later they raided his office, and he had made it. And so we were raised with those types of stories, and I think that not only did it encourage us to be adventurous and take risks that I don't think my dad realized he was encouraging us to take, but we got through them, but it also just, I think we just became really excited and passionate about that part of the world. If that's what it had for my father, then what does it have in store for us? And I actually went abroad junior year from Brown to Chile. My brother lived in Mexico for 3 or 4 years. And there's an edge. In the places that we work, there tends to be an edge where it's a mold in progress. Like Colombia and Brazil are 2 places we've worked a lot, and the Dominican Republic and Mexico, where there's such a vast, rapid social change going on that there's something very scary and very appealing about watching this stuff transform before your eyes. And we've often felt a little uncomfortable portraying stories from other countries that aren't our own. And we've been critiqued for it too, and some people just hate the idea. But a lot of what we try and do is connect with documentaries, is connect with characters and say, we will service your voice how you would like. So if you want to tell the story a certain way, we can be your liaison to a bigger international audience. We can give you tips. You can let us know what, what angle, what approach you want to take. And with Favela Rising, we actually gave cameras to kids, and we taught them how to shoot. We left the cameras there. We hired a teacher actually to stay with them. And a lot of the more amazing access to the instances of violence in the favelas, just the roaming cameras through the alleyways, we could never have done. The police would never have let us do that. But the fact that these kids were there all the time, they figured this won't get out to the world. And in that case, it was a good example of, it was self-representation to a certain extent, and they had us to try and help reach a much larger audience, and we all kind of aligned with that agenda to make this film as accessible and emotional as it can possibly be. So I would say that the interest in Latin America is an interest in collaborating with Latin Americans and also an interest in spending time there. And that's a big consideration for us. When you list what do you value in your career, what is it that you want the most, it is going to be an inversely proportional relationship between making money, status, being in a fun, sexy place, social impact. Right? Each one of those choices, the more emphasis you put on being in a fun place, in some cases, the less commercial your projects become. And in our case, because they're Spanish language and they're not headline news in the United States. So that was a trade-off Mike and I were really happy to make. Yeah.
In regard to transformation, the favelas, many of the film in Sao
Don't know it, no.
It's the same concept. It's like
right.
Music, dance.
Yeah, there's a lot of them.
There's
yeah.
a lot of it. So
yeah.
do you have an interest in some kind of enduring story about that? Because they're still struggling. They're all.
I know, yeah.
They're all tragic. It's like that model, as you say. I mean, do you keep that alive?
Like me alone, no. But I can try, I can help. I mean, we did something with Ili Aye in Salvador, in Bahia. We did something with Ili Aye, who was much more political. They were a little more challenging to work with because they want systemic change, right? Afro-Hege is a little bit more, cake and eat it. Like they'll work with the government even though they're critiquing the government, and they're kind of just a little bit more compromising. Ili Aye was just a radical, fist in the air group that alienated people and was super critical. Oludum is on the other end of the spectrum. It's another similar group, and they're doing, in Salvador as well, they're doing shows in the streets for tourists, and they're selling their CDs, and that's how they're making their money. So they're very commercial. So even the choice to focus on Afro-Hege rather than these two more radical groups on either end of the spectrum was because we felt they were accessible, they had enough message, and yet enough accessibility. But keeping it alive is one of my goals. I want to keep telling stories of communities overcoming the odds, doing positive things, lasting change, making lasting change in places that the media almost always portrays as falling apart. And one of the things I like to talk about with Favela Rising, I know we're talking a lot about that film, but I'll quit after this, is that during the time that we made this film in Rio, something had just happened, which is a journalist named Chim Lopez had gone into the favelas with a hidden camera, a little lapel, like a spec camera, and he was going to what's called the Boca de Fumo, which is where they sell the drugs, and he was filming these shaky, secret tapes that he was then bringing back to his news station. I think he went in 4 or 5 times, and it was on the last time that he got caught. And the drug dealers, in order to mock the system, right, to mock the state, who's their rival, who doesn't go into the favelas and has no power there, they basically did a mock trial where they had themselves as the jury. And of course they found him guilty and they tortured and killed him and they taped it with his camera and they sent it back to the station. And as a reaction to that, the networks in Brazil said, we will no longer cover the favelas, right? If that's their reaction, is that they're their own entity, that they're autonomous, then we're no longer going to send our guys in there. It's too dangerous and it sends the wrong message that they deserve our representation. And so this was during a dry spell where very, very little representation was coming out of the favelas. There was no favela voice. And when you spend time in these areas, not just the favelas, and I'm sure a lot of you have traveled and spent time there, but 99% of the residents are peace-loving, hard-working folk, and 1% is getting all the negative media attention. And so particularly with the favelas, they just got stigmatized as all being thugs, essentially. And they, for that reason, really embraced the idea of shooting themselves, having somebody who could access distribution outside of the major networks in Brazil. And that's been true in other areas that we've worked in as well. That if you are international, then there's a certain amount of leeway that you have where you don't have to get involved in the back and forth between the state and the armed parties. And so these communities become a little bit more accessible, and that's something we want to take advantage of, absolutely. And film festivals is an amazing venue for those types of films, because you can travel with a good film, even if it's not a first-tier film festival premiere, you can travel for a year with your film, and you can do Q&As and bring people along and do workshops and educational programs the entire time. You know, it gets, as a filmmaker, you want to get back to filmmaking after a while, but it's an amazing opportunity if you're leaning a little more on the activist side than on the artist side, for example. Yeah. I got into film at Brown. I was painting and writing out of high school, and I was taking Latin American studies classes and some development classes here, and I realized that I could remember enough information to rock a test or a paper for like 3 days. But somehow, like the way I'm hardwired is that my short-term memory just vanishes after 3 days. And so even though I was learning how to think around issues in creative ways, and that's been invaluable, and that's how we solve all our problems, is let's think out the box, how can we approach this from a new angle, and that comes from, you know, good liberal arts education. I wasn't retaining enough for those writing and reading classes. And I said, well, I'm spending a lot of money here, how can I take advantage of the resources this place has to offer? And the spot where it felt like I had the best potential was in the virtual reality studio, and I had no access there. I could not get in, so then I moved to film. And I learned the cameras, and I learned editing, and I remembered it. It was tactile, and when I was able to retain that knowledge, I started teaching editing while I was at Brown in the multimedia lab, and then, and it went from there. I got a grant when I was a senior. Does anyone know the organization Amigos de las Americas? Has anyone heard of that? It's like a youth exchange program in the summers called Amigos. Okay, good, so I could talk freely. Amigos I had gone for my summers abroad when I was in high school, and as did my brother, to do these social service programs. You build aqueducts, you build latrines, you educate about the environment, about health issues, and you spend multiple months in these very rural communities in the developing world, particularly in Latin America. And so I needed to have a thesis project with Tony Coates and Michael Silverman. And I applied to them. I got a grant. I had been working for the organization. They gave me $5,000 I bought a camera for $3,000 senior year at Brown. I spent the other two buying plane tickets, and I went around to various places where these volunteers, I had been one 3-4 years earlier, were doing these social service programs. I spent 10% of my time filming the promotional video for the organization and 90% filming this critical documentary about youth volunteerism and all the problems that it had, right? The stuff I said earlier, there's, you know, it's paternalist, we act superior, we're 16, we're little, you know, pock-faced, zit-faced goobers who don't speak Spanish. What do we know? And we're going down and telling people how to live on their own land, right? And so I thought it was going to be best of both worlds. And you know where this is going, right? That's the foreshadowing. And so I get back, I edit the promotional video. They love it. They start using it to recruit people. Like, there's tears they're reporting at every single one. It feels so good. And then in the meantime, I edit this really honest, you know, more authentic account of what's really going on. And it was my senior thesis project. I finished it, and I got into my first film festival ever, was the Hamptons Film Festival with it. And I got approached by PBS after my first Q&A, and I got approached by PBS, and they wanted to distribute it in the United States. And I was through the roof. I was 22 years old, I had just gotten out of Brown, and I was going to have my documentary distributed. However, I didn't own it, right? I didn't own the footage, they owned it, because they'd given me the grant for it, and I didn't have clearance. I didn't have signed talent releases from anybody. And so I had to go to the president of the organization, but I'm sitting here, idealist, you know, 22, thinking, they'll sign it. They're a non-governmental organization. They believe in real lasting change. They believe in sustainable change. This is a critique that they should embrace, right? That would be the natural approach. And I send it to the president of Amigos. I don't hear from her for a long time. That's a bad sign. And when I finally do hear from her, she tells me two things. The first thing she said was that she cried, not because it was moving, but because she had fallen in love with these 16-year-old volunteers in the promotional video. And she despised them in the documentary. And she couldn't believe, she couldn't wrap her head around how recontextualizing the same imagery, just re-editing it, could tell the exact opposite story, a 180 opposite story. And the second thing she said was, I want to make it absolutely clear that nobody will ever see this documentary ever again. And there's nothing I could do. I legally could not promote the film, and I also felt really bad about it, and so I had to shut it down. But it was a real coming of age moment for me. You know, you don't. The concrete lesson is you don't let your subjects finance your film, because you're going to end up in that situation. But I think I learned a lot more than that as well. Yeah. We work with fixers in those environments, and we tend to do two things. Popeye is Popeye, right? That character killed 350 people with his own hands, is in a maximum security prison, and they had 2 guards there when we were interviewing him, and we ahead of time set up who those guards were going to be, and we made sure that they were decent guards. But it's always about, you know, if it's in a prison, it's different. But if you're getting access to somebody who's dangerous, you get it through a fixer who's worked with like the New York Times and reputable international agencies who's done this work before and has a good temperature read on how dangerous something is, how hot the situation might be. And then you also go to whatever gang or affiliation that person is a part of, and you notify whoever the highest person up is that you can get in that gang of what you're trying to do, so there's no surprises. And we've tended to feel that if you've got for permission or the understanding of a superior, then the chances are that they're going to monitor. You tell them where you're going to be, what day you're going to be there in the neighborhood, and the chances are a lot higher that there's not going to be any surprises. With Popeye, there was a moment in the prison where we had loads of equipment. I was always concerned that we had like tripods and with blunt edges, and you know, there's a lot of weapons in that space. He had no reason to be mad at us, right? This is just all my imagination run wild. But there was a moment where my brother was handing him the release, and he dropped the pen, and I think was it Casino? What was the film where like Joe Pesci takes the pen and goes at the jugular? And Popeye like leans down to get the pen, and my brother's face just went white. And he froze, and Popeye just hands him the pen. Hey man, you all right? Here's the pen. And afterwards I asked him, and in his head he was thinking, oh no, this is that Joe Pesci scene. And so a lot of times it's like, what I found with danger is that if it's in your imagination, it's way more haunting than if it's right in front of you. You know, with 16-year-old kids running around with guns in the favelas, they don't really know what they're doing, so I guess there's like the chance that somebody could slip and pull a trigger or something. There's the accident probability, but I wasn't as afraid there as I was in Colombia, where we didn't encounter any guns. However, there's this thing called the mano negra, which means you're always being watched, the black hand, right? Like journalists have been kidnapped, journalists have disappeared, and that imagination of somebody watching us and maybe being unhappy with our choices or the way that we're telling the story scared me beyond, like Edgar Allan Poe, Stephen King, right? Stephen King is not scary to me. He tells you every graphic detail of those bloody scenes, and I'm not afraid of blood. Edgar Allan Poe sticks you in a closet, drops a torch in the closet, chains the door, story over. The rest is up to you. And that's the stuff that keeps me up at night. I mean, that's just a roundabout way of saying that we do our best, and our mom freaks out.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's a couple opportunities to weave in nonfiction to weave in real archives into the Pele film. And we've been working with Pele himself, and he's got a part at the very end. We actually have him do a bicycle kick with a wire, with a cable. So it'll have some of that, but we're also going to do some real stadium stuff. And yeah, there's a couple ways it's done with visual effects to do big stadium scenes, and it's quite expensive, but you shoot it in a green screen type environment, and then you do a stadium extension, and there's these programs that animate masses, that animate crowds, so you maybe only have 200 people in the stands, but they use their movements and they create a computer code that then takes their movements and randomly assorts that animation throughout the stands, so that you don't end up with everybody doing the exact same bob, and everybody it feels like they're individuals, and it's done computer generated. It's used in all the big sort of war movies and sport movies. We'll have an opportunity to work with that. I actually have I cut some short clips of that thesis story I just told you about the volunteerism. Do you guys want to see that?
Yes, yes.
You know what happened with Amigos, which is interesting? I'll step away from the mic for a second. I'll play it in a second. I found out this year that somehow there's been a cult following for that film that I never got to play, for my documentary, within the Amigos community. Because there's a lot of people who have the same sort of critiques and hesitation that I did. And I don't know who slipped it. I swear I did not leak my documentary after that. I did not leak it. And somehow there's been a copy that's been circulated amongst the staff, and this year they played it during the training session for the Amigos staff. And so they're actually using it, it sounds like, as a training tool, which is kind of the best possible outcome for the film. Yeah. So, if this was a fiction script, she would have her character transformation and decide what was right. And blow the whistle on her own organization. Yeah, I love it. And that's why she's no longer there. All right, so there's, let's see. So what I'll show you first is like a small section of the worst promotional video you've ever seen.
When I left home, I said to myself that this is going to be the best time of my life.
Since 1965, Amigos volunteers have participated in development projects in rural communities throughout Mexico, the Caribbean, Central and South America. Through partnerships with local Latin American agencies, schools, and clinics, volunteers promote basic health and environmental education, as well as bridge cultures and form new friendships.
Every day that I've been writing my journal, I've had something exciting and fun to put in there.
Tengo mucho amor para los voluntarios. Quiero que vivan hoy y siempre, y que recuerden que estuvieron en mi casa, y que algún día deben volver a visitarme, a ver cómo yo estoy.
Great sense of accomplishment, and it makes you feel that you can
Amigos definitely changed my life. I mean, when I look over my life,
but it gave me a real balanced perspective.
It was the first real exposure that I had that made me look at the values that I held.
And to have the kind of infectious enthusiasm that young people bring to a community inspires people in ways.
I fell in love with the people. I really do.
Until we look back and we thought, oh my gosh, we really did that.
Amazing, really profound relationship.
It made me think seriously about what I wanted to do with my life. I think so. In there, I can't think of parts of my life that Amigos hasn't affected. I mean,
Amigos teaches you can do anything, and that's, that just sort of says it all. If you have that kind of confidence.
I think it gave me great deal of confidence. The potential young people have, and trying to create opportunities to bring that out. Nothing I've done since compares with the fun, excitement, challenge, the awesome responsibility, everything that Amigos provided.
You gotta throw the Margaret Mead quote in there and all promotions.
Transform me.
It's amazing. Okay, so now the real story. And thank you for not applauding for that, because it is disastrous. Which one will it be? It's just a piece of the film, of the doc.
No sabe hablar en español. Sí sabe, pero no sabe pronunciar el español. Por eso hace mucho que
Casa grandísima. ¿Será? Ya. Más que lo que yo veo.
Casa bonita.
Pero me imagino que en los estados es casa más bonita, ¿no?
We were internally frustrated with all the neighbors because they didn't seem to want to work at all to help themselves.
And he went off on a tangent and he started talking about the stoves, and he's like, you guys think you know a lot about this stoves and everything, but you've never made one. I'm a campesino. You guys know nothing about.
I learned how to live with the earth since I was 5. He said.
Yeah.
Y él tiene la plena seguridad de que va a funcionar, y yo le dije, no, va a servir. Y él me dice, ayúdame, ¿para qué? Si yo conozco bien. Disculpame por la palabra, yo le dije, yo he vivido así, acá desde mi infancia, conozco la calidad de la tierra y el lodo, pero usted no sabe nada de eso. Y a Jacob no le gusta.
2 different people showed us their finger. He had a little tiny cut on his finger, and he's like, oh, I can't work for another week because I have a cut on my finger. And I was like, oh yeah, a rock fell on my finger too, but I've been working or whatever. And so they just kept on trying to give us little dinky, stupid excuses.
Más, y eso va a aguantar, a mí me parece.
Check it.
Le va a ayudar más.
I think he's saying to put the iron into the...
Eso va a servir, pero así.
He's saying to put. I think he's saying to put the iron into the lodo or whatever.
How many people told us it wouldn't work? 7. Who had never tried it before.
But they were so definite in themselves.
Yeah, they sure knew that. It wasn't gonna work. Damn, man.
Amigos benefits of volunteers more in the communities.
¿Dónde está la mesa? Well, he didn't want the stove anyways.
In the communities.
I'm just taking apart this guy's kitchen.
He took apart the mold. So we're gonna do what, like
va a caer. Ese va a caer.
¿Usted va a ayudar?
Rompe.
¿Usted va a ayudar?
Bueno,
Profe, ¿usted no quiere este?
Pero
Sí,
no puede
no.
ser. No puede ser.
Entonces no quiere este.
Trabajo mucho. Y usted me trabajo mucho. Sí, va a ser otra forma.
Entonces usted no quiere este. Quiere sacar este.
Si rompe, ¿no? No sirve, no sirve.
You know more Spanish than I do. I need some help here. I'm trying to ask.
That's just one of many disturbing stories from that film.
Oh.
I was looking to see what else I had. How are we doing on time? We good?
Well, I think.
More questions? We're done?
Nice, well-rounded. Oh, kids movie. Kids. Last question. Kids movie.
I'd like to. Maybe we should come up with an idea together. Nothing comes to mind.
Maybe if you grow a little older, then it'll come into sync.
We'll find something to work on. Any other requests for movies we can make together? Yeah, absolutely. The way the Pele project got put together was that there was a life rights buyout, which is an intellectual property legal thing, right? Where Pele has been signing various different endorsement deals for many years, and a group of investors said, the World Cup is coming to Brazil, the Olympics are coming to Brazil, and the Confederations Cup is coming to Brazil. We could make a gang of money off of Pele. Let's make him an offer and buy outright all of his intellectual property, right? So his book rights, his life rights, any appearance rights that he has, all of that. And it was a group of investors from London, and they made the second biggest life rights buyout that's ever been recorded. I think the first one might have been Muhammad Ali or something like that. And so Pele then belongs to, it's really weird. They're like, we can get Pele anywhere we want. We own Pele, essentially. And then from one of the multiple projects that they were going to do is a fiction feature. And it was just an open call, and they were interested because we have soccer experience and Latin American experience, and it was a battle. It was months and months of, we invested our time, our money to do stuff that would, is high risk. And once we got attached to write, there was no guarantees that we would direct, and so then you have to keep courting. And it's been going for about 1.5 years. And they got Imagine involved, who's a big production company out of LA, so it's got a little bit of momentum and credibility now. But it started with a life rights buyout, which is a really similar, that happens a lot, where the underlying rights, a book, whatever the film is based on, a book or a person, that a producer goes out, even an independent producer, someone could be fresh out of college and see a property and say that property is going to have value, and they go and they do an option on that property, and they give a little bit of money to the owner, and they say, give me 2 years to go shop this around, and then they go out and they get it financed, and they attach people, they put a package together, and they pre-sell it to distributors. Then they are now locked in as a producer on the project. So that's a very traditional trajectory for a bigger budget project that's based on something fairly notorious or well recognized. Yeah. Cool.
So Jeff, thank you so much for everything.
Thank you, Leslie, for talking with us.
Yeah, it's just great to see you and see what you're doing, and I think we can all join in a big thank you.